Even know.
No, I never know what I'm going to ask, except that it's just I need to get to the heart of things, and I need to not have to rub my eyes at the very beginning. Hey, what if we had a show called The Backpack Show?
What? The Backpack Show? That's a show that looks into business success and finds you
Oh,
insights about success from unusual places.
man, that'd be cool. Let's do a show like that today. We can have
Okay.
people from, I don't know, the world of podcasting, the world of uh, beautiful visual imagery, and
Perhaps
how much it.
Dr. Rebecca Swift,
Dr.
Global Head of
Rebecca Swift would be
Creative
a good one.
Insights at Getty Images.
And also coming up on the show, Matthew C. Witter, who's a great podcaster, who
Hey, he
does a
is,
show that I
though.
used to know the name of until you asked that other question. So
You
I don't know
said
if
that as though it isn't true,
it's a
except
kid's
that it is
podcast about
true.
or a podcast about a kid. There's
It's
a
a
dog in it.
kid's book about.
All right.
But it's the podcast.
Right. So,
And
you know,
each-
when I heard this, I thought it was a children's book about podcasting. When
You
I'm
are-
older,
You are
I wanna
ridiculous.
be- You know,
It
like
is a
those.
top educational podcast, and it doesn't sound anything like you're making it sound.
No, it's
Very fine
It's
production.
intense too. Like the topics. Holy cow!
Well, yeah, because kids have questions about things. They're a
Well,
lot smarter than we give
wait
them
till you
credit
hear
for.
because this gets serious real quick.
Well,
Hi everyone, Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, welcoming you to The Backpack Show. Your hosts, Chris Brogan, Kerry Gargone, Boom Shakalaka.
Backpack Show. You know, if you hang up on someone twice in a row, don't you think that would mean I don't want to talk to you?
maybe they just think you're playing hard to get.
Oh, no, you know who it is. Hi, Chris. I'm calling from blah, blah transport. I'm coming to pick up that Camaro.
Shut
Just want to
up,
make
really?
sure that works for you.
You better answer that one. I'll wait. I'll handle the show. Hey, in fairness, they have to call because if they just show up to take your car and you're like in the middle of something, you'll be mad. You would be like, why
I'm
didn't
gonna
you
be
call?
mad regardless, you know. I mean, I'm going to be professional and business-like regardless.
Okay.
I see that my biological father and I see his wife have arrived. Good to see them.
Your parents, you mean? Yes.
Yeah, Coach
Janice.
Witter. Janice is here. Chloe's here from Scotland. Hey, we have one of your neighbors. We have a Brit. You know, that's practically a Londoner.
Yeah, I
So-
suppose. Hey, big news. The Backpack Show next week is moving to 7 p.m. Eastern.
For all of May and possibly all of June, we shall see. We're testing. We're testing evenings. My gosh, is that Leslie Goslin Burgess right there?
She says, good morning. You better
The
get
one,
used to
the
saying
same.
good evening.
Good evening, friends.
'Cause
7
it's-
p.m. Eastern kicks Dr. Swift out the door. She's not going to show up at 5 a.m.
No,
the only person
that's
who does that
true.
sort of stuff is Chloe.
Well, then we'll have to have like a European week where we feature all
We'll
guests
have a
from
European
Europe.
week. Why not? Proper breakfast, you know, all that stuff. Let's grab ourselves one Dr. Rebecca Swift. We have to ask so many questions. Why, hello.
Hello from the UK.
Yeah, down the street from London proper or something.
Yeah. A stone's
see.
throw, as we say.
Dr.
That's very
Swift.
classy. Everything sounds better when you say it.
Pretty true.
Even things I've heard before.
You work at one of the most storied companies in the world that when people hear the name, they instantly know what it means. They don't have to ask you. So what do? You just say the company name and they go, oh. But that wasn't your origin story. Where were you first? What was young Rebecca Swift working towards, and how did you land where you got?
That's a very interesting question because it's probably not the story that most people expect. I grew up in a little village in the countryside and was desperate to move to London. Went down the usual route of going to university, getting my degree, moved to London, very poor, no money, needed a job. Found an advertisement for a photo agency in London, in Camden Town. If anyone knows London, Camden's a very cool area to work. And applied and got the job and did not think anything of it really, other than it was going to pay me to stay in London. And I came from a background of studying English literature, so really not prepared to work in a visual medium. And I started the job and I was like, I'm going to stay there 2 years and I'm going to move on and do something else. I imagined myself working in an ad agency, which now I'm so glad I am not doing. Just really fell in love with the industry, fell in love with the company, which it started off as another company, which then became Getty Images back in the 90s. And have stayed. And I left actually to go off and do my PhD for a few years. did some other stuff, did some teaching, worked at universities and things, and then I came back again. So I've been back 9 years now.
When you get your PhD, do they give you a mug like that commemorates the experience? Or they do. Now I want to get a PhD. A JD's not the same. You don't get a mug for that.
That's exactly why you spend 8 years studying. It's all about the mug.
Obviously.
If you've got the mug, you will go places. Yeah.
It's handled. It's handled now. So you had one of those early flats when you moved down to the city the first time, one of those like on the young ones or something, you know.
Oh my God, it was exactly like that. Yeah. It was officially there were 5 people there, but there was at least double that at any one time, plus extras. And it's funny when you're young how you just seem to accumulate extra people, and you get up in the morning and there's people.
What's the right amount of people?
And then and then you kind of, as you get older, you've got more of a idea of who's in your house. But that was kind of the lifestyle that we had at the time. And and I think our company, you know, we went from analog photography, for those that are old enough to remember that, so you know, shooting on film, to digital, which was really exciting. You know, we went from shooting a few thousand images a year to hundreds of thousands of images a year, to now where we're shooting millions of images every month. It was kind of a very exciting industry to be part of, and there was some really interesting things happening. And we set up my team in the kind of late 90s, and we're doing all this research around, you know, what images work and how people react to images, and thinking about, you know, what the visual language is saying currently and how it might evolve in the future. And that was actually really exciting, and I still find it really interesting, even though, you know, I dedicated 8 years of a PhD to it. I've dedicated pretty much my entire career to it, but it's still really, really interesting, and things just change all the time. It never really stays still. So that, you know, that's great. I think probably the hardest thing for me right now is, you know, when I started in the industry, I was in my 20s and very keen to, you know, change everything, and you know, the old people just didn't know what they were talking about. And now I've become the old people, the young people want to change. It's like, how did that happen? At what point did that happen?
One thing I want to get out of the way, sort of, or talk through for a minute, because I want to talk more about what you've done to this space. I mean, there's so much that, you know, never even entered my head until I saw what the write-up of why we were talking to you is about. But so a lot of people who have started their life on the internet, they look at Getty as the big bad wolf because it's about intellectual property and locking things down, and oh no, Getty acquires Unsplash. That's the opposite. You know, Unsplash is about giving. That's the stage, right? That's what some people think. You know, agencies have lived because of Getty. All kinds of photographers who weren't getting paid get paid because of Getty. Rights management has happened because of Getty. There's all this important stuff, but in the sort of, if I can see it's mine culture that some of the internet is, it has that kind of feeling going. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, and I think the key thing about what we're trying to do, and I think one of the great things about working at Getty Images is that there's a lot of people who are very, very passionate about art, artistry, artists. We call ourselves an image company first and a technology company second, in that we use technology to do what we do, as in serving up content online. But actually, everybody who works in the industry is really keen on making sure that artists get paid, that they get acknowledged, and so on. So sometimes that kind of gives you the impression that it's this massive corporation that's, you know, throwing its weight around. But, you know, we have 1,800 people that work at Getty Images around the world. Obviously, we have a contributor community of, you know, 300,000 plus. But in essence, it's not a massive corporation, and we tend to kind of go for those, I suppose, those issues that we know are being discussed. And I'll talk about the copyright one actually, and the internet. You know, there was that period of time where everyone was just right-clicking on Google Images, and it felt like a new frontier. Like all these images were available, and it's like, wow. PowerPoint presentations got really visual there for a while.
For like no reason too.
I know, yeah, let's just shove them in. But I think what now and education is slowly catching up with that, is that somebody put their, they put their time and their effort and their money a lot of the time into those images, and for you to just go and take it is you wouldn't allow someone to do that in real life. You wouldn't allow them to just come and take a photo of you and run off with it. So we took on people like Google who were allowing that to happen, and we took them to court and won. And so the whole I suppose the infrastructure of the internet now has changed, and you can't just take people's imagery. And yes, that might be annoying in the short term, but in the long term, it protects people's work, and that is a good thing. So we see that as a kind of a good step forward. And the other thing is, we get criticized because we're the biggest, of course, for perpetuating stereotypes, for perpetuating stock photography. But actually, if you look at everything we've done in the last, 10 years at least, we have not been actively working in the way that we were in the 90s. And there's nothing more annoying, and I'm talking to all the journalists out here, there's nothing more annoying than a journalist going onto our site, searching for a woman, and then going to page 3,700, finding a really old image from the late 90s, and then publishing that and saying, oh, this is terrible stock photography. And we're always trying to move forward, and that kind of goes back to actually what I was saying about being one of the oldies now. It's really interesting how you work in an industry and you wake up one day and you're suddenly the person who has to make these decisions and right. Tackle these difficult issues. There's no one around you. You're kind of looking around waiting for someone else to do it.
When is the grown-up going to come? Yeah.
Exactly. And you realize you are the grown-up. And that's kind of what happened to me, more recently, is being in this kind of leadership position, to actually use that power for good, which sounds very probably over dramatizing, but using the power that I have in this company and the perception of the company to have the conversations with the industry, the media, marketing, advertising, whoever, and asking them questions about how they're, how are you depicting people? Who are you showing? Who are you making famous? Who are you kind of putting in the front of your ad campaigns? And helping them kind of break that down and think more carefully, because, we're thinking all the time about many thousands of pieces of content that are being created every day, and bringing some of that learning and that experience to other companies.
You say we, but still somebody has to lead that charge, because it takes effort, however minimally more. It takes effort to be inclusive and think about things like representation instead of just who's available Thursday at 3 for this thing. So tell me a little bit about that. How do you it's like turning a cruise ship when the company's that big. So
I think that's a great
analogy. How do you get it moving?
Well, I think it's what we found, and I'm going to talk specifically from my own personal experience. What we found is that you can get really bogged down in the theory, and you can talk and talk and talk and talk, and you can get lots of people together, and they can come out of that meeting feeling really good about what they're going to do, but actually there's no action point. So the turning point for us as a business actually was we worked with Dove on a project called Show Us, which we launched in 2019, but obviously we've been working on for a couple of years. And the concept of that of that whole project was that we'd have female identifying photographers shoot female and female identifying models. And what that did was that stopped that conversation around it's always the male gaze on women, the objectification of women. This is women as they see themselves, because the people who were being photographed were the ones who got to choose, who got to choose how they were depicted and how they're described. Oh, there we go, it's on the screen. And we didn't allow any retouching. So again, it cuts down that conversation on,
no retouching,
unless of course, if there was a Nike swoosh on a
oh right,
we wouldn't publish with that. So that then creates a different kind of image, and it changes the conversation to, okay, well, if we've done it this way, what works and what doesn't work. And then let's compare that to when we have a broader range of people shooting content. And I think that's kind of where we're at as a business now. We've looked at how we can do women better, how we can create, let's use the word authentic or real depiction of women. And then we've started thinking about disability. So we're working with the NDLA in the US and Verizon Media, who have been great at kind of, partnering with us on that, working with 17 different disability organizations to get the depiction of disability rights, allowing them to give us guidance on the content we're creating, and allowing them to actually edit. They actually edit the content for us, as in they choose what we keep and what we don't keep, making sure that we're getting all of our descriptors right, so we're not doing any harm to certain disability communities. So, looking at that specifically, we're looking at age specifically with the AARP, who have got a rich archive of research that we have access about how older generations want to be depicted. And then right now we're working with GLAAD, again, who have a very strong presence, mainly in the US, I believe, in the media industry on the depiction of the LGBTQ plus community, and creating guidelines around, how to shoot and represent the transgender community, how to shoot and represent the LGBT community. So we're kind of bringing in experts, and you can kind of feel within the company that energy is changing. We're bringing these partners, we're bringing in other people to kind of accelerate the conversation internally. And you can feel the shift in our culture now. We're kind of building that culture away from being apologetic to, well, actually, this is the stuff we're doing, and this is what we feel really good about, and what are we going to do next,
So the criticisms probably get a little more granular, like, well, why are the women standing on the lower step? Like, you get to that point,
Exactly, and it's never perfect, and I think that's what makes it really interesting. We're doing a lot about thinking about intersectionality now. It's great to talk about gender and disability and race and ethnicity, but then you have to look across all of the identities.
This comment, I'm going to run the risk of covering you a little. So I apologize. Annette wants to say, using the business power for good. Love what Dr. Rebecca Swift is breaking down for us to understand the learning and experience of Getty Photography's evolving business model, the intentionality changing the conversation.
Yeah, I think intentionality is a really good word, because we felt like we were doing it before, for many, many years. We've been having these conversations, but I think actually doing it in a big way and really sticking your neck out and saying, actually, this is what we really believe in, and we're going to make sure that we create a code of conduct for our photographers. We're going to edit out anything that we think is going to do harm. Really thinking about all of our internal processes, about how we're captioning, how we're filing content away. We're looking at our archive, which is largely untouched, because it's all analog, and making sure that we build more equity in stories that are told from marginalized groups and underrepresented groups.
Do you retire? I'm so sorry. You mentioned something about an archive. Do you actually retire images at a certain point? Like you mentioned people going back to pull, tacky stock images or kind of typical stock images from years or decades ago. Do you ever retire them?
Only if if there's a reason to, in terms of things have changed in the world of the world of imagery. It might be as we started thinking about the Show Us collection, do we keep some of the images of scantily clad women still in our collection? And that, and we made the decision not to. So, you then have to go back and edit. But the archive is an analog archive. It's glass plate negatives, it's prints, it's the old school, and it's incredibly rich. We're always finding new stuff in there.
Nerd
And
in me loves that.
it's really, really cool. It's a great place to visit, and there's always something new that they found. Yeah, it's based in East London here in the UK.
The thing of beauty. Carol asked a question, and I guess this will have to be our last question, and then we'll bring you backstage for a bit, and we'll talk to Matthew. What's going on with Unsplash? Can you talk to that at all?
Yes. So we're really excited to have Unsplash join the Getty family. We have been talking to them for many, many years. We were really excited about their business model that they've set up. It goes against everything that we believe in, paying for content, licensing content, and in that way it kind of feels like it's not a good mix. But they, the people that they are attracting, not only in terms of their contributors but also their customers, are the people that we also want to attract. So there is many opportunities not only for customers to move seamlessly from free to a subscription or a lower cost content through our Istock platform, which is a subscription based model, or our contributors to move to shooting content and being paid for it.
Right.
So it's actually a perfect partner. It's a perfect kind of coming together of minds.
So would it be fair to think that Unsplash, Istock, Getty, is that how one would sort of?
Yeah. And we're not touching iSplash. Nothing will change for iSplash. It's a separate company run by a separate group of people, based in Canada, as Carol said.
Will it stay free? Carol's asking.
It will always stay free. Always. We absolutely believe in the free
Love
model.
a smile.
Yeah.
That has to be the painkillers, Carol.
Well, Dr. Swift, thank you so much for being part of that. And oh my gosh, so much. By the way, I realized that I had us kind of stuck on a really dopey looking screen. It's because it kind of popped a new tab open, and I'm looking at these amazing images just by myself. I'm just scrolling them.
You nerd.
I was trying to do it for the screen, and I was like, you dork. So anyway, thanks so much. We'll put you backstage. We'll pull you back. Don't forget. So
yes.
Run and get a bite.
They don't go away.
We got to read a couple ads, but don't go anywhere. We have Matthew C. Winner, who's an educator, K through 5 educator back in the day,
Man,
librarian, podcaster. There is so much. Winner, chicken dinner. All right, so we are sponsored. Castos, who just acquired Jay Acunza's podcast, which sounds weird to me, so now I got to call Matt. But we're sponsored by them. They're a podcasting host. I have been a user of other podcasting host platforms for several years, but moved to Castos just to try it out because Matt's a bro. If you like ducks or live video streaming, you could do cbrogan.me/StreamYard.
You're so weird. Make your own show. cbrogan.me/StreamYard.
There you go.
Get your own revolutionary stock photography.
I know.
Visionary.
There would be like a front lines inside of photography, life-changing.
I am in love with Dr. Swift.
Me too. And I want the hair so much. Okay, hey, look, want a .online domain? You could get Dr. Swift's hair.online for $1 US for the first year anyway. cbrogan.me/online. Use the code Chris in all caps.
Get Chris Brogan's hair.online.
Yeah. We have fewer fans.
Coach Woodard had a question, which we'll ask when we get back to Dr. Swift. He had wanted to know about her kind of transition from the more narrative approach to visual art. So,
all right. But first, we have hard-hitting news stories from the front lines of Kidlit. So we're gonna jump it up. Hey, Beth Barry, it's been a minute. Good to see your beautiful head. All right, let me grab my man Matthew Winner. Hello, Matthew.
Well, hello there. How are you? Great to see an Animal Crossing image in that last shot, by the way.
Thank you. I wish you were more expressive. It's almost kind of hard to read you.
I have a face for radio, so this is a very different thing for me to be on video.
I feel like you had to do well in life because it would have been too embarrassing to be like a Matthew Winner and I do nothing of consequence.
Carrie, it's the story of my life to say how much it's been to live up to that last name, and then to have a younger brother who just really embraces it and was like, we're going to name our first kid Ima. Adorable. Wait for it. There you go. You got it. Yeah, not me. I took a little different path.
Is you make Yura, and then it's like encouraging to everybody you meet your whole life.
No.
So I have to ask the obvious question. You're the head of podcasts at a kid's book about, and the podcast is a kid's book about podcast. Why wouldn't it be a kid's podcast about You need
Because
to
the entire network is called a kids podcast about. We will have
Book
10 plus shows by the end of this year, a whole network of kids podcasts written, hosted by children or by adults that are centering children, talking up to them about lots of big topics because we know they're ready and we know they're listening.
boy, do we have somebody you need to talk to. Katie Falls.
Oh, Katie Falls would be a great. She's a teen book reviewer on YouTube. She's a YA reviewer.
I'd love to talk to Katie Falls.
Oh my God!
And when she came on, she actually opened up about, having things with anxiety and other kind of struggles. And she was very open about it and very articulate. I think you would love her. Okay, show's over. That's all we had.
Show's over. See you, Matt.
You would love her. Bye.
Matthew, you obviously have a lot to draw on. You have a long legacy of podcasting experience, backed by a professional experience in educating children. You have a librarian background. You have all of these things intertwining, and clearly just a little spark of the entertainer. I need to know, like, age 7 to 9, Matthew Winner. What were you?
So it's sort of a beautiful thing that I'm now working with a kid's book about, and that I was drawn into teaching because kids are my people. That's where I get my energy. So we're talking about them. We're talking about where I feel most comfortable. I was a really quiet kid and have always been a person that just felt the eyes of the world on me in a really hard way. And so fighting to protect the agency and dignity of children has been my life's work. And so, not from coffee or those amazing books. Glad you like it.
Organized by color, as librarians are wont to do.
Mr. Winner, do you have that book with the blue cover? I know exactly what you're talking about. No, but that energy really, I think, is from fighting for them. They are my strength.
You said, like, in the very first sentence replying to us, you said something about talking up to children, and that phrase just whipped into the back of my head. I was like, say something about that later. That's beautiful because I think Carrie is a parent, and I for sure, I raised my kids. We always treated them, like the age they were, but like they were a contributing part of the system. Can you talk just a little bit more about that? Because I bet that's something you observe a lot in other parents, that you sort of try to model your way for them to understand.
We didn't even pick my sons up without asking them first if they wanted to be picked up. I was like, that's damn undignified. Just like have somebody just pluck you up because you're small.
I think that people have a tendency to want to protect children, want to shield them from maybe whatever harm we went through as adults. I don't know. But in doing that, we are keeping them from understanding the world, and we're keeping them from changing the world. So I think knowing that we can respect them and hold that space for them and talk to them about any tough topics. In the library, I talked constantly for years and years about anti-racist values and about making sure that they knew that I was on their side, that if it came down to whatever issue was going on, that I'm going to treat you fairly and with equity, because that's what you deserve. You deserve to be heard in that space. I think that we often as adults can look back and say, well, the person I am today was largely informed by the way people treated me when I was a kid. So I want to make sure that I'm protecting our future by helping to protect their present.
You're muted, Christopher.
Mother trucker. I've never podcasted before. I mean, we have David talks about change. We have Evelyn talks about sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Caverly talks about mindfulness, anti-Asian hate from Kim. These are not, we're not talking about,
your
which
favorite
Power
color.
Rangers. Yeah, Power Rangers or something you color. This is big. How do you approach those episodes? What do you do?
So the main podcast that we have that I host, A Kid's Book About the Podcast, is based on the books that we published. I don't know if you've seen the books that we published. Kid's Book About Racism, A Kid's Book About Sexual Abuse, written by Evelyn Yang, wife of survivor and wife of presidential candidate Andrew Yang. We also do really responsive things, A Kid's Book About COVID-19, and we released A Kid's Book About anti-Asian hate. The podcast is meant to be a partner for the books, as well as a way for kids to enter in without having to buy the book. We know that you're ready for this conversation. And so when we constructed the podcast, we bring in kids' voices as well as the authors from those topics. All of our books are written with own voice authors, folks that have been there and have experienced those things. They might not be the leading expert on whatever topic, but they've lived it. And we know that when we live experiences, that doesn't discount at all the value of us talking about them. So on A Kid's Book About the podcast, I'm talking with kids and that author on the same level, put them on the same playing field to say, what is sexual abuse? What are the questions that you have to honor that they're ready to talk about these things? And when we make the podcast, much like I did in teaching, I know that parents are the gatekeepers of our listeners. We know that any parent is going to want to listen to the podcast or read the book or do a thing before they hand it to their kid. So we run that complicated act of making a show that we know kid is going to get through the door because parents are going to value it, but one that ultimately when kids listen, they know I'm making this for you. I'm not the grownups need to hear it, but I'm making it for you. It's safe for you to listen to. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you, but I'm also not going to keep the truth from you. I'm going to talk straight with you and give you that vocabulary. We don't change vocabulary in our books or on our show. We're going to talk straight about these topics, knowing that you're ready and that at the end of the show or at the end of the book, you're going to have questions. And that's the point. We need to keep asking those questions and keep seeking that knowledge so that we can form our own understanding, and more so we can protect ourselves and those around us. That's what's going to help make this world better, is being able to understand the different experiences walking through this world.
Just grab this off my shelf. We talked with Kevin
Carroll
a little while ago. How great is he? Casey Catalyst. So the books are easy to read. The podcast has a sort of similar feel, like it's 15 minutes. It's not overwhelming, and yet you cover a lot of ground in that 15 minutes. Like it feels like a journey. How do you orchestrate that? Like how do you pick the right child host for that?
I think it comes from many, many years of doing podcasts and of working with children. I worked with children for 16 years in schools, elementary school librarian, and I started off as a fourth grade classroom teacher. I've been podcasting for about 8 years. And I've been listening to podcasts for, I don't know how long, over a decade. And so having all of that imprinted on me, having those fingerprints all over me in that way, I think has helped me to know how to navigate that space, know how to craft something that walks us through a discussion that anticipates what questions kids will have and that meets them with answers, or that validates their feelings around what does it feel like to have anxiety, or what questions do you have about sexual abuse and why it happens, and be able to be that space to talk to kids, knowing, same with when I was in the library, I think more often it came when we were talking about identity, when it came to talking about LGBTQ identity or came to talking about gender identity. That, for some reason, is a hard topic for parents to talk about. I could talk about racial identity all day long and talk about the disgusting and violent things happening to Black and brown people in our country. And my parents of kindergartners wouldn't bat an eye at it. But as soon as I talked about knowing that gender identity is assigned when you're born, the doctors look at your body parts and say, this is the box that we're going to check for you, but that the individual as they grow up might say, I don't think I identify with that box. That for some reason was extremely controversial, even when talking to 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds, or the parents of the 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds. And so leaning into the confidence that I have that kids are ready and that I see kids, I know them, and that we can craft something that speaks to them is what drove this podcast. And the other shows that we're developing that we're about to release all have a similar theme. The hosts are centering kids. We're not making something to entertain children. We're making something to engage them, to educate them, and in some cases, in many cases, for them to educate us. Some of our shows, one of our shows about social justice and activism is hosted by an 8-year-old who is an activist himself. We have a podcast coming out about climate justice. That'll be a 12 part arc, a beautiful arc. We have a show about facts where, those facts that kids love to share, maybe you love to share, that's like, did you know that wombats poop cubic poops? Did you know that snails can live underground for 10 years?
Oh, now you're speaking Chris Brogan.
I'm here for the wombat poop.
Here for it. So we're taking all that knowledge that we have, and we're going on a fact-finding journey with a journalist from WBEZ in Chicago to ask, how do we know the things that we know? How do we know, and what's the nature of how facts can change? Serena Williams is arguably the greatest tennis player, but also the greatest athlete of all time. Does that mean now or forever? And how do we know what defines that? So we are covering so many different things through the shows that we're producing and bringing on voices who haven't had a chance to be heard before, but really to be centered and to be centered alongside children as we do it. Really exciting.
Nancy Harhut made a comment. I'm afraid it was going to cover you completely. My nephew just today posted about a memory he has of being 7 or so and having his mom share that she was anxious about an upcoming interview, and he still remembers the positive impact of being let into the adult world. So powerful.
That's beautiful, Nancy. Our literally almost on cue, the episode that we're publishing on Monday is our author Ross Zabo, who wrote a book called Behind Happy Faces, wrote a kid's book about anxiety. And it's a beautiful conversation because the two kids that end up being on the show, Carrie, you were asking me before about how we get these kids. We just reach out and say, here's our platform. Do you want to speak? Here's the topics we're talking about for this show or the things we're working on for the other shows. And those kids self-select. And I'll give a comparison for the anxiety episode. You'll hear that the two kids that are on end up asking these beautiful, brilliant questions about anxiety. And they both reveal themselves in their questions that, why do I feel this way? Because I struggle with anxiety. Why do I have to do that? And it's beautiful that kids lay out their truths in that way. And by contrast, the episode we did about sexual abuse, both of the kids responded that they didn't know what that was and why does it happen and why don't we have more laws to protect the survivors. And the beautiful thing about that, as I was producing this, is that I am a survivor of sexual abuse by someone at my church who babysat me when I was 8 years old. And the way that those kids, and this is what kids do, this is why I work with kids, the way that those kids asked those questions made me feel seen, made my 8-year-old self feel seen. So I don't discount the power of giving children a platform to share their knowledge and their questions, because I believe they really are leading us forward.
I want to ask a question that sort of bounces right off that. We found, so we have a bunch of teenagers on the show. And one of the reasons we do is that we sort of view them as, we can learn a lot of business advice from them too. We had this kid Jacob on, who's a Twitch streamer. The first thing Jacob did when he finished said, "Can I please have my friend on?" I think it was Ethan. He was like, "Can I get Ethan on the show? Because he just got 100 subs, and that's big news to me. And it would be great if he could be a guest." And people refer guests sometimes, but not normally, 11, 12, 13, 14. So he says yes. We grab Ethan on, and he has a big rainbow flag behind him. And then I sort of go, "There's something on your flag. What's on your rainbow flag?" And he leans out of the way, and it's a paw. And I said, "Oh, so your cat's gay." And I'm half making a joke, but I really don't know what it means. And he goes, "Oh, well, that's for like furry rights." I said, "Oh." So do you identify?
Which, by the way, he had never mentioned publicly.
He had never talked about this.
Wow.
So this is live on our screen. I said,
this was the time.
I
Beautiful.
said, "Do you identify as a furry?" I said, and I really quickly added, because I could imagine like that dropping on you on an interview. I said, because we had Ash Coyote on, who's a furry, but also did a great documentary called The Fandom, which is free on YouTube. Come get some. And he was like, I do. And so we go on, we ask some other questions. I said, what's your fursona? Like, what these furries have, kind of animals that they identify with. And he said, well, part wolf and fox. And he named it and everything. And I thought, this is amazing. So the question I have, sorry for that super long buildup, but I felt like you needed the callback.
Yeah.
You were saying how kids sort of out themselves is the wrong term, but they put their thing on in front of people. Mm-hmm. How do you? I didn't do anything to get that. I just asked, "What's that flag?" Are you doing things to try to gather that info out of them, or do you let it come to the table? How does that work in your interactions, in your interviews?
I think that the way you do that is by just making space. literally making space. And if they trust you, if they feel like it's a welcome and safe space, they're going to share that. As children, they are testing out their truths. They're testing out how it feels to say stuff out loud. As adults, I think we are highly sensitive, or I am a highly sensitive adult to how are other adults gonna react to this, and that drives stigma, doesn't it? But for children, they're testing that out. So for them to say that, we partnered with an organization called Gender Cool, which centers the voices and experiences of transgender youth. And they're writing 3 books with us: a kid's book about being non-binary, a kid's book about being transgender, and a kid's book about inclusion. And I worked with one of those champions to write the book of a kid's book about being non-binary. And as Hunter is sharing their truth about being non-binary, you just feel that resonate, that the more we are willing to welcome and also give of ourselves, let me speak my truth in front of you, or let me point out my ignorances, or let me acknowledge maybe the transgressions that have happened in the past, but the path I'm walking now. I think that is how, Chris, we make these conversations happen with children. We build that trust. I can't imagine where we're going to be in a year at a kids podcast because by demonstrating, in kids podcasts, there's when you look at the kids and family category and Apple, it's dominated by the family side, by parents giving advice to themselves, or it's dominated by fictional storytelling, which is beautiful to do fictional storytelling. But to step into a space, this is what Rebecca was saying was resonating with me, to step into a space where no one's done this before. We are doing a kids podcast network with this nonfiction focus, centering their voices. It's just not something that's been done before, or that's been done all in, that we are entirely focused on them because that's who we believe in. To know what it will mean for these kids to find this platform over the next year. I've already had kids approaching me about doing shows, some of the shows that we're going to do in the second half of the year, where it's I didn't even know you knew that we were doing a thing. And here you're stepping in, trusting that, like, I have a voice. I could do a thing. One of them was a voice on one of the episodes that I did, and she was engaging me that, oh, I love this. I'd love to do opportunities more. Can we talk? So I had a chat with a 15-year-old who wants to do a show with her best friend.
You're pitching a show.
I was like, this is brilliant. And had we not, same with working with any child, if we don't open that door and listen at what they can share with us, then we are in that way ostensibly shutting them out.
That's
not just their idea, we're shutting them out. And that'll have ripple effects.
You're absolutely right.
What did Sondheim say? Stephen Sondheim in Into the Woods. Careful the things you say, children will listen.
Boy, is that the truth.
I'm grabbing Dr. Rebecca Swift back because I have a feeling, Doctor, you have a lot of thoughts on this conversation.
Well, finishing with a Sondheim quote, I mean, that's really impressive.
Well, I didn't sing it to you. That would have been maybe more. But
yeah.
no.
I mean, feel free.
Love that song.
No, today is one of the reasons I love doing the show so much. Like, I am so in love with the work you're both doing, and no matter what, like, Chris and I love doing the show. We've been doing it since July. This is one of those days that I'm like, yes, this is
let me tell you what today meant to me. I played hooky yesterday, and I was so mad yesterday, and I didn't want to do the show ever again. I was so mad. Everything was bad. People are bad. The show's bad. Every guest is terrible. And you are so both lovely. My heart's full to the top with everything you talked about. And just imagine on both sides of this, though. Rebecca's out there making sure when you type sexy woman into Getty, you get a nice 86-year-old lady who still looks amazing. You get on the other side of this, you get someone saying, am I trans? And you get a podcast and a book series and everything about it with Matthew. This is huge. Reshaping the world, huge. So thank you for showing up today for that reason.
Thank you for showing up today.
We're not shutting off the show. I'm just saying thank you for being here.
Glad you didn't cancel the show. Thanks for that, Chris. We appreciate that.
I forgot to tell him how the show ends. It's not like this. One question for both of you. When people feel moved to do some of or echo or emulate some of what you do, they're not yet ready for Getty Images. Maybe there's a 11-year-old, or maybe there's a 61-year-old photographer who's only recently come to their love of photography, or there's a 13-year-old saying, I think I'm going to start a podcast. How do you get them to that spot where they know that that there's a path? How do you help them find their origin story in what you've already done? That question's to both of you, so whoever answers first.
Rebecca, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I do a lot of work with students, trying to help them find their voice, but also to understand how that voice can have an impact commercially. And I think at school you kind of learn so much in isolation, and especially when it comes to art and I include photography in that. So being able to think about, okay, well, I come from this community, or I identify as this person. How do I use that to share my what I want to do with the world and make a living from it? Because that's obviously the bit that I'm interested in, is encouraging people into the career and to stay in the industry. So there are many different ways of doing that. Unsplash is a great way of getting started, sharing your content with the world, seeing what reactions you get, seeing what people download your content. If you're ready, and you'll need to be 18 to do this, but if you're ready to start selling your content, then you can join Istock. Absolutely anyone can join Istock. We welcome all comers. So there are kind of paths that we've set in place for people to do that. And then if anyone has an idea around a certain kind of content that we are not doing well, or they would like to discuss that in more detail, then I'm always open to those conversations. Kind of like the conversations today. I love meeting people who are very passionate about certain work that's being done and how that might impact visual content. So very happy to have those conversations.
Carol wants to know if wombat poop, if that fact is actually true. Carol, get a wombat.
I'm truly surprised that Chris didn't show the picture yet. Chris, you must have Googled it.
You know what? I have, and I'll bring it up. But listen,
I'm happy to respond too. But I mean, yeah, it totally is true. It's amazing.
Yeah. And there's a reason. There's an actual physiological reason for it. They use these to mark their territory, like a lot of animals do. They put their poop down to say, "This is my area. Don't come here." But in a lot of places where wombat terrain was, the poops would roll away, which means they would kind of mismarker their territory. So they evolved square poops, which look like unwrapped chocolates for kids to enjoy.
So, Chris, you're doing our show, not just the how we know what we know, but why. That's beautiful. I would say, in terms of kids starting podcasts or starting whatever, that the way that you do it is by affirming their inherent value. That we all have something to give to the world. There might be 2 million podcasts that exist in the world, not 2 million active, but there are 2 million that exist in the world. But the world hasn't heard your voice yet. And the experience that you have, or the questions you have, whether that's a lived experience or something that you just don't understand. Maybe you have, maybe what you need is to help bring somebody else in and listen to them. There's many, many different ways to get into podcasting or to get into whatever. But the first step is to know that you have value and that other people want to hear, and not to judge your value by how many people hear, but to judge it by the content of your lived experience, that it is valuable.
And then as they move along and they have lots of episodes, then you can tell them why their show sucks and like really fix those production values. Get that mic fixed. All right. So we have a thing we do on the show every episode.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
It is very difficult to pick a person in the day-to-day. So many people, so many great conversations. I'm going to go with Annette. Standing O for the show today. There you go.
I like this one too.
Yep. Agreed.
Holding space. What an important concept.
Agreed. Although way back here, so Leslie had said that I raised my children that way. So I've known Leslie since 6th grade. And one of the things I learned from Leslie when her kids were young was she taught her youngest, probably both of them for all I know, sign language to communicate. And when little kids know sign language, they can communicate so much better. And so I put that in my little mental Rolodex. And when I finally had kids, we taught them sign language. The world is a better world if they'll do it.
We did that too.
Kids of the
I
day.
also told my kids that they were in charge of their body, so we never did that whole like hug your grandma thing. Like,
Yes.
I'm in charge of my body, and I said no.
And I still do that.
No, I don't do
I
it.
still do that.
There's no mandatory hugging of any kind.
Give your grandparents a hug. No, we've changed that. So we have one thing left to do. What goes in your backpack? This question is asked to everybody from Sir Mix-a-Lot to Sister Ann Flanagan. So don't worry, you're part of a new tradition that's lasted almost a year. What goes in your backpack could be something physical or metaphorical. Could be something like what? Carrie, what's a good physical thing we could add to our backpack?
A book you hate, because eventually you'll learn something from it. Like if it's the only book you have to read. Whiskey Nate, put that one in the backpack.
Great. How about
Some people take
something
things out of the backpack.
Right.
Remember the Oral Knots on YouTube said you got to take ego out of the backpack if you're going to work together on creative projects.
And that would be a metaphorical thing. So they took ego out. So now we have the question for you. So first, Dr. Rebecca Swift, what should we put in the backpack?
Oh God!
You went first. You had all this time to think about it.
No.
This is the first time you're hearing it.
I'm a classic creative. I leave it right till the deadline, and then I make a decision. So I think my thing to go in the backpack would be is to question the status quo, question the way things are done, always. Because there's usually a reason. The reason things are the way they are is probably not as established and important as you believe they are.
Sometimes people don't even know why things are the way they are. They're like,
yeah.
There's a story I love to tell from this Boston area company called HubSpot, where when they walked into their new space for reasons not quite understood, well, I guess budget, every other wall was painted with that dry erase paint so that you could just go up and write on the wall. But every other wall was dry erase. So one day, in a fit of excitement, this woman comes over to the wall and writes, "Why hasn't anyone?" And she started to figure out the answer to the question. And it was why she was going to write, "Why hasn't anyone used this wall yet?" And it was because it wasn't a dry erase wall. And I said, what would be a really great thing to do is put a frame around that, because that's a great question. Just like what Dr. Swift said, why hasn't anyone? Because you don't always know the answer why. So I kind of keep that around my head. Matthew Winter, I gave you extra time. Something physical or metaphorical to go into the backpack today, good sir?
I mean, the why hasn't anyone is a beautiful thing. So I'm gonna say a physical thing. I think that everyone needs to have a voice recorder in your backpack. And that reason is similar to what I just said, because your voice matters. I want you to record your voice and listen to it and play back your wisdom and then share it with others. It's important that we get to hear that our voice matters. Get comfortable with it. Step into your power.
I hated listening to my voice the first time. I do all my own editing.
I sound like a squeaky Cockney. I hate it.
You are not squeaky.
I had meant to ask just a wee bit about the Cockney part, because I kind of picked that up a little. Did you grow up on the rhyming and everything when you got to the city and all that?
No, I do have half of my family were born under Bow Bells, which is the description of a true Cockney. But no, I was kind of born and raised in south of England, so I just have the accent. Yeah,
just from the little village, but you snuck it in a bit.
When you said Istock, I heard Istock. I was like,
Istock.
That doesn't make sense. But then I was like, yes, it does. It does, if you think about it.
Eghorn. Nice.
I got it. But yeah, I agree with Carol. You sound great.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's on pain medication.
A lot of medication right
so
now.
It's the truth. You sound very classy.
Well, one thing my grandmother would have appreciated about today is the ability to let people be who they are. One way that she definitely showed that, and one way that you could always know you were in the right space at my grandmother's house